Hello guys, welcome back to a brand new video on the channel. And today's video, I'm going to be taking a look at the worst 10 brawlers in 2023. But before we get into the ranking, I just want to give a huge shout out to you guys, especially for the support throughout the entirety of last year and especially the last 3 months. The growth on the channel and just on a lot of different socials has been insane. So again, thank you so much. Without you guys, I would not be in this position, and it's been such a good year in terms of opportunities I've had. You know, I've had the chance to go to Finland. I've also had some casting opportunities in person. It's been a really good year, and also for me personally as well. Also want to let you guys know that I won't be back with the daily live streams until like maybe another week, because I'm away next weekend for like 3 days or so in Hungary. So again, just kind of bear with me this next week, and then we'll be back on the grind. So without further ado, let's jump into the the worst 10 actually brawlers in 2023. Starting off with Jackie. So some of you guys might disagree with me straight away, because Jackie's in an okay spot in the meta right now. She's pretty balanced, but before her hypercharge, she was terrible. There's no ways around it really. She was one of the worst brawlers for a long time. You need to just take a look back at my tier list, and she actually appeared in the F tier 2 times last year, which just goes to show how incredibly weak she was. And also she's pretty much always in the C or even D tier as well. The reason why she was always consistently low was because she never really received any buffs up until August. So she was terrible for pretty much 8 months of 2023, and still then it was only a small buff to her gadget, which gave her a little bit of an increased bit of speed by 5%, and also duration of the gadget by 1 second, which again didn't really do too much for Jackie. Still, the big problem with her was she had no range and no really good maps for her to push on. But again, the hypercharge came in and it definitely gave her some love. But still, I think she was definitely in the top 10 worst brawlers for this year. Okay, so jumping into the 9th worst brawler in 2023, I went with Leon. So we've got to ignore recency bias here, because for the last 2 weeks, I think Leon has been really strong, but the year lasts 50 plus weeks. So you've got to take into account the other 95% of the year. So for me, Leon has to be one of the worst brawlers for 2023. Mainly because if you take back at my have a look back at my tier list, pretty much all of the time he was in the D tier. He never left that. Maybe C tier a couple of times, but he was never used in competitive. I never used to use him in Power League whatsoever. And then when you take a look at whether he received any buffs, even though he was consistently trash, he only received 2 buffs. He received a buff to his HP by a couple of 100 HP, which did nothing to him, and then also to his mythic gear, an increase in 1 second, which actually works well with his hypercharge now, but at the same time that didn't do anything in terms of the meta for him. So I think it's just been consistently pretty trash brawler. I'd say standalone brawler, he used to feel okay, but then again, there's just so many better options than him throughout the years. So for me, Leon definitely didn't have his meta in 2023. He was consistently at the bottom. Alright guys, so jumping into the 8th worst brawler in 2023, I went with Edgar. So you might be wondering whether he was in the most broken brawlers video yesterday. Well, that doesn't mean that he wasn't completely trash for pretty much the entire year, except for the last 2 weeks. So yeah, his hypercharge came out, he was broken, but for the other 50 weeks, just like Jackie, he was absolutely terrible. So again, you take a look back at my tier list, I think he appeared in the F tier I think 4 times, which is absolutely insane. He was just never used in competitive. I think the only time he was useful was maybe on a couple of heist maps, or if you're really looking to counter someone as a last pick, you know, throwers, stuff like that, but that was just hardly ever the case. So he probably only used a handful of times in competitive. He also received a couple of buffs throughout the year, but didn't really do anything to him. So he received the HP buff back in April, a couple of extra 100 HP, didn't really do anything for him. He was still like a D F tier brawler, and he received another quite big HP buff, another 300 HP on top of that. But again, that didn't really do anything back in September either. It was only until the hypercharge came out a couple of weeks ago where it was even considered to be a decent option in the meta. So for me, Edgar was always at the bottom and always pretty trash. So now moving on to the 7th worst brawler in 2023, I went with BB. So If I'm personally speaking, I'd have actually put her a lot lower on the list, but I know some people have some bias towards her. But she has never even been close to even C tier in this meta. I think every single tier list, I think she was pretty much a D tier or F tier, because there's just been so many additions into the game, so many new brawlers that have overwhelming mechanics, knockbacks, all of that stuff that just counter BB so much. And she's still never been buffed in return. Maybe she's going to receive a hypercharge in the next batch, which might make her a little bit better. But for now and for the entirety of 2023, she's been terrible. Again, there's only been a handful of times I've seen BB in competitive. I think the only time I've seen her in is like Hot Potato and maybe Pit Stop. Everywhere else, she's just trash. There's just a lot better options. In terms of buffs, which did nothing to her, she received an extra sticky gadget buff back in June, and it only increased from 2 seconds to 3 seconds. It did nothing. And then a small HP buff as well, a couple of 100 HP, which again did nothing. So BB's just been getting bullied the entire year, and there's just not been any scenario where she's been popping off whatsoever. So I'd say she's been consistently trash. Now moving into the 6th worst brawler in 2023. It pains for me to say this because I love Byron, but it is Byron. So for me, I think it's just been terrible the entire year. So yeah, you can say in some ways he is underrated, and you can make him work. I make him work pretty much all of the time in ladder, but we're talking strictly competitive and meta game here, and he's just never used whatsoever. Again, there's only been probably a handful of times I've seen him the entire year. Even though he's a healer and you'd think he's a consistent support brawler, especially with a lot of tanks in the meta, he just still was never used. He received a couple of buffs throughout the year, but that didn't really do anything for him. He received a reload time decrease from 1.6 seconds to 1.45 seconds. I thought this would help him a bit, but again, he was too squishy. They then buffed him again to make it so his super was only charged in free ammo, which definitely helped him. I thought that was going to push him into like the A tier maybe, but it was very evident very quickly that Byron was nowhere near enough in the meta. Again, too squishy and just too vulnerable. And then hypercharge got added, and that just countered Byron even more. So he's always consistently like a C, D tier brawler. And again, I've just never really found any use case for him this year. Okay, so now jumping into the 5th worst brawler in 2023, we have Chester. So just like some other brawlers, he definitely had a little bit of time in the meta in 2023, but this time around it was at the beginning of 2023 where we saw Chester as like an S tier brawler, or like the best brawler in the game. He was released in late 2022, so it kind of went over to the next year, but it only took 2 weeks into 2023 for him to receive 6 nerfs, and these nerfs pretty much killed him for the entirety of the year. There were nerfs to his main attack damage, and there was 4 nerfs to his Jawbreaker super. If you guys remember, that stun was so broken, and now it's okay. But yeah, that was definitely one of the main reasons why Chester is no longer meta. But he did receive 2 buffs throughout the year. One back in May, a small buff to his HP, and again, another buff to his HP a couple of weeks ago. But nothing has really helped Chester that much, because the big thing with me is that I just feel like his randomness isn't that good anymore. It actually works against him. Before, it used to be, especially when you didn't know what Chester did, right? A brand new RNG brawler, the surprise factor was huge. But then people have learned about Chester. His supers aren't actually that great, and he's quite predictable at the moment, especially with the way his normal shots go. So for me, I just think he's been one of the worst brawlers easily last year, and hopefully he receives a little bit of love. But then again, at the same time, I don't want randomness to be too meta. Alright guys, so now jumping into the 4th worst brawler in 2023, we have Mortis. So again, just like some other brawlers, he's pretty decent right now in the meta, but I would say for 9 months of 2023, it was pretty much always in the F tier. So I think he was in the F tier 4 times out of 7 this year, just going to show how incredibly useless he was in the meta. Again, if you're just some plain random, especially playing Brawl, you'd think that Mortis is the best brawler in the game, but he just was never used in competitive. This is mainly, again, due to the fact that all of these new brawlers coming into the game had knockbacks, some type of stun, or just way more overpowering features, especially like new tanks, etc, etc. Mortis just fell out of the meta. There was just no reason to use him. But again, recently he has been pretty good. So we'll go through the buffs. I think he received 4 buffs overall throughout 2023, which eventually pushed him back into the meta. He received a main attack damage buff back in June. That didn't really do anything for him. He received a buff to his combo spinner gadget, which did nothing to him, didn't help whatsoever. But the big change to Mortis was with his ammo. So his long dash actually never required free ammo to start charging up. So you could have a long dash pretty much at any time. So that was a really big thing that pushed Mortis back into the meta, but only really around a B/C tier, only like a niche pick. So for me, Mortis quite comfortably has been one of the worst brawlers in the game, because for 9 months he was F tier. Okay, so now we're moving on to the 3 worst brawlers in the game right now. At number 3, we have Hank. So just like Edgar in yesterday's video, Hank was in the most broken brawlers of the year, but at the same time, Hank was actually one of the worst brawlers in 2023. So if you just ignore the first couple of weeks, maybe month of his release, straight away after that, when he received those nerfs back on the 27th of June, he's just been unusable. So the second half of 2023, he's been terrible. Even after 5 buffs, it has been near enough unusable, I would say. Again, there's a few scenarios where you might use a Hank, but at the same time, there's so many better options. He's been in the F tier 5 times out of, I think, a possible 5, because of course he's only been introduced, I think, around June time, so he didn't actually get to go into every single tier list, but still, that's very impressive. 5 times, I think that's pretty much the most, except for the other 2 brawlers on the list. In terms of the buffs he received some buffs to his HP, his super damage, again HP a month later, and more main attack damage, especially at minimum charge. But this just did nothing to him, because the reason why Hank was killed was because of 2 things. They changed it so he was now visible whilst charging up his attack in grass, but the big thing is that he could no longer heal whilst charging his bubble. I think that's just a key fundamental to Hank, which makes him trash, because it takes so long to just start his heal process. It's just really awkward to use Hank, and for me, it's quite comfortably one of the worst brawlers of 2023. Okay, so now we're moving into the 2 worst brawlers in 2023, and this was a really hard choice. These 2 last brawlers are equally as terrible throughout the entirety of the year. But at number 2, we have Frank. So Frank, believe it or not, I don't think has received a single buff this year. I think that was like a small technical buff with his sponge star power, but I'm not really going to count that, considering he's always been in the F tier. The F tier 7 times last year. I think every single time in the F tier, he's been utterly trash. So again, the main reason why Frank is at the bottom of the meta is just so many brawlers that can interrupt his super, keep out of his range, and of course, just the main mechanics of him are really outdated. He has a delay to his attack, a delay to his super. You know, good players or just players with eyes can pretty much avoid a lot of his damage, and he's just a walking super machine. So of course, a good Frank can get some value. You know, he's not completely unusable, but again, in comparison to all other brawlers in 2023, I pretty much think I've seen him maybe once in competitive, maybe twice. I think the only reason to ever use Frank is to counter brawlers like Rosa and Ash. Other than that, there's just no use case for him overall. So for me, I think this year coming, he needs a big rework for him to even be close to the meta, and hopefully we get that soon, because, you know, he's just been completely useless the entire year. Okay, so now moving into the worst brawler in the game in 2023, we have Doug. I think it's very obvious that he's been one of the worst brawlers in Brawl Stars history. He's just never saw the light of the meta. I think maximum, I think I put him in like C, maybe D tier, maybe once, and that was definitely an overestimate. I thought some buffs might have been good for him, but definitely he's been one of the worst brawlers ever. F tier 3 times, and for me, he's just been absolutely unusable. In low trophies, he feels okay, but I just think he's one of the worst designed brawlers in Brawl Stars history. Again, I think the actual character of Doug is quite funny. His voice lines are funny, but that's about it with Doug, really. I mean, he's just literally Jackie with extra steps. Everything about him is really boring. Again, I'm just going ham on Doug at the moment. That's just how it is. Of course, Brawl Stars from time to time might miss a couple of things with a brawler, but I think they've rarely missed as much as Doug, to be honest. I think a complete rework is needed, to be fair, because again, I just don't really see how it can work with Doug. This kind of brawler doesn't really work too well, I think, in 3v3. In 5v5, he's actually pretty good, but in 3v3, it just doesn't make sense with his limited range and how he can work. So, yeah, for me, should probably just be deleted or completely reworked. Hopefully he might see a little bit of love next year. He received like 4 buffs, but that just didn't do anything for him whatsoever, and quite comfortably the worst brawler of 2023. So that's going to be it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know whether I missed out on anyone. In terms of honorable mentions, there were a few brawlers like Primo, Cole, also Bull as well, that had their fair share of trash metas, but again, I think there's only been maybe like 3 brawlers that have just been completely trashed the entire year. The rest of them has had their time in the meta a little bit. So that's going to be it, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.